Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today I'm going to talk about exploring space from India. So, how many of you guys actually recognize these pictures up there? Well, okay. I think most of you recognize Earth, but how many of you can talk about these two pictures here? Okay, that's right. So here is the picture of Mars, surface of picture of Mars, and surface of the Moon. And these pictures uh, are taken by Indian-made spacecrafts. So if you okay, so how many of you guys actually recognize these pictures here? Okay, just one person out there. Well, so let me tell you the correlation between these pictures and the ones that I showed you. So the the satellites that were built by the Indian Space Research Organization actually took those pictures of picture of Earth from a distance of about 70,000 kilometers. And it was taken by the Chandrayaan-1 spacecraft. And the other two pictures were taken by the Mars Orbiter mission and Chandrayaan-1. So India had gone a long way in terms of starting space research to where it stands today. So they had a very modest beginning. So they started off with a makeshift arrangement. So they used a church in Trivandrum as their mission control center. There were days when they carried rocket parts on bicycles, and there was a time when they actually carried satellites on bullock carts to a level where they're able to uh, tell you on the extent of damage that has happened during natural disasters. So here is a picture of Uttarakhand before the flood and after the flood. So they have been able to build missions uh, that talk that are applied in various domains like Earth observation, telecommunication, disaster management, so on and so forth. And most of these missions are accomplished using big satellites as this. So this satellite is ResourceSat-1. It weighs about 1350 kilograms, and it's placed at an altitude at about 815 kilometers. So let me start telling you about my journey as to what we are trying to do and where it all started. So way back in 2008, I was an undergraduate student in SRM University in Chennai, and there was a scientist from ISRO who had actually come there to deliver a guest lecture. And that's when he actually mentioned that we as students could actually build satellites. So I was sitting in the auditorium somewhere, and I was like, okay, so how can we build a satellite of this size? And will we really, the satellite that we build, will it actually solve any problems? Is there any application to it? And he mentioned that we could build small satellites, typically weighing about 12 or 15 kilograms, and actually solve major problems. And well, I was not really sure if that's going to happen. And a couple of weeks later, I came to know that my university has actually started working on this mission, and I was selected by my department to be part of it. And when we started off, we were just like few people, maybe 10, 15 people, and we were contemplating on what kind of mission we should be doing, so on and so forth. So this was when we went to the ISRO Satellite Center in Bangalore to give a presentation on what our satellite would probably do. And this gentleman here is a retired scientist from ISRO, and he was a mentor in terms of what we wanted to do. So when we initially started off, there were a lot of difficulties. People started saying, "Okay, you guys are definitely not going to do this." There were people who inspired us in the sense mentioned that ISRO even ISRO had a similar difficulty in its early days, but they did pull off big missions. But we were just students, and how we could do it. But we did start working on it, and soon our team grew to about 50 students. And later on, we spent it took us about 2 years to build the first satellite, and it was launched on the Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle in October 2011. And so that's the uh, that's the beacon signal from the satellite that we listen even today. So uh, while we were building this first mission, there were a lot of things that I learned. Few of them were like, there was this question. So India has the Indian space program has is world renowned today, and India has a population of about 1 billion, but yet there's not a single company in India which has actually built satellites here and put it up there and owned it. While there are so many companies in the West and Europe who are actually doing the same. So this was a question, and then I tried to answer. Just try to think about whether we can actually do something in this area. And I tried to do an economic study and understand if whether we should be doing it, not doing it, so on and so forth. And obviously, there was an outcome which said that there's a lot of economical advantage when you build systems in India and launch them out of India. But back then in 2010, 2011, nobody was willing to join hands with me to start a venture. So post this mission, I went on to do my master's program in Europe. So I spent some time in Germany, Sweden, and Singapore. I had a chance to work on the Swim and Sara payload that was flown on Chandrayaan 1. We had an opportunity to build small CubeSats. So uh, essentially, a CubeSat is a device which has almost all the systems of a satellite, but it is not actually sent into space. So you're just simulating something like a spacecraft, and you're doing experiment. So we did a lot of high altitude ballooning experiments in the Arctic. My colleague had actually worked on moon and Mars habitation systems. I spent some time in Singapore where I worked on my second satellite mission. And by the end of my master's program, I felt it was time, both me and my colleague felt it was time that we return back to India and give back. So when we returned back, this was the problem. So you go to a potential customer and say, "Hey, we could solve your problem. We could probably build a satellite for you," or we could say, we can do ballooning for you. So the problem is, people had this notion that, okay, you guys have never done this, so uh, what is the guarantee that you can deliver something? And that is because nobody has done it before. And we there's this saying which says, okay, as time goes, things get better. So it took us about 5-6 months, and then we had an opportunity to work with a professor from Indian Institute of Astrophysics. So Indian Institute of Astrophysics was working on high altitude ballooning programs, where they were sending up balloons to do some studies about astronomy. So here is a picture of ISON, and IAA was actually building an instrument to study comet ISON. And we, having had the prior experience of doing some ballooning activities in Europe, got us an opportunity to work with them in some capacity. So we supported them in terms of telemetry and recovery of their payload. So we had a small instrument that was attached and sent the data. So here you can see, on one of the occasions we launched the balloon from Bangalore, and the balloon was supposed to land somewhere outside of Bangalore, but it ended up going towards the Arabian Sea. And there was a lot of learning in here. Actually, we did about 10 experiments. I think the first 4 of them failed, and after that we started seeing success. And in this particular experiment, this was more like a deal breaker for us, because we had to prove that we can actually deliver results. And the balloon started floating at 18 kilometers, which was not as which didn't go as per the plan. And yeah, so we were able to track beyond 600 kilometers, which was really good for us. And after 20 days, we were able to recover the payload from the sea. Not the entire payload, but parts of it. So here is the launch of balloon. So here is a small payload, and we have little parachutes here. Those balloons carrying the payload. And this is the image of the Earth that one of the cameras on payload captured. So yeah, well, when we started off, we were not really sure about whether we want to do ballooning or we would want to do satellites. But we had this notion that yeah, we had this experience of building satellites, and our idea was to build satellites and provide solutions based on the data that we get out of these satellites. So it took us about 2 years to actually move forward, and with the Make in India program, we kind of forged a MOU with a German company called Berlin Space Technologies to manufacture Earth observation satellites in India. So we are a small team. So it's me and my other colleagues from Dhruva Space, and that's a guy from Germany. So right now we are looking at building a satellite factory in India that can actually go meet the existing demand, where people are trying to build constellations of satellites. Our idea is to have this factory here so that we can manufacture small satellites at economical cost, and use the Indian launch vehicle and put them up there. So using small satellites, we want to solve real world problems. So the image here is ISRO's satellites actually have produced the energy map of our country. So if you look at this image, you can actually identify uh, in which location you could probably produce more amount of solar power. So this is just one application, but we with by having constellation of satellites, we that is having 20, 30 satellites around going around the Earth, we want to look at the possibility of identifying an individual house over which you can determine what is the amount of solar energy that you can produce. This is just one application. Similarly, there are other applications. So let's take the example of agriculture in India. So most of you know that there are a lot of farmers' suicides that are happening here, and one of the reasons is because most people don't like the government has a crop insurance policy, but when a natural disaster happens and there's a crop damage, you have a government official who goes physically to the farmland and identifies what is the extent of damage that has happened. But that takes a long time, and you can't determine really what is the extent of damage that has happened a couple of weeks ago, or in certain cases months ago. But if you have a constellation of satellites, you could actually provide real-time information on what is the crop output. In some cases, you could provide information on where there is fishing stock, and you have varied applications across varied industries. And this we want to augment this technology by uh, working with the Indian Space Research Organization, because they have these bigger satellites, and we want to use these smaller satellites in tandem with these bigger satellites to produce solutions that can address the problems of the world. So that's where we are, and we right now we are looking at the possibility of launching our satellite in the next couple of years, and we hope that once we launch our satellite, we will be able to evaluate its performance and then look at the possibility of having constellations that will solve major problems. And so we've gone a long way so far, and we think that it's difficult to say what is impossible, and so the dream of yesterday is probably the reality of tomorrow. Thank you.